2010 looks to be shaping up the same way. And again, I would just point out that this is a cross-enterprise kind of solution here where the operational force, the Human Resources Command are both struggling with how to get the training, how to get people to the training, and we've been able on the enterprise to try and find an efficient solution to be able to do that. And with that, I'll turn it over to the material enterprise to talk some of their missions.
Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the low biorhythm portion of the afternoon. These are exciting days for the material enterprise, and I just want to make sure you know the effort is led by Dr. O'Neill, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition and Logistics and Technology, supported by General Dunwoody, the Commander of Army Material Command. And right now, they are all busy, focused on developing and delivering the very best equipment to our soldiers in the theater, while at the same time, they are bringing back, repairing, and redistributing equipment from the theater to make sure that our units that are in the ARFRGEN cycle are equipped with what they need to go back to the theater. So there's no end to the conversations about equipment and the material life cycle and what we have to do to support our soldiers. At the same time, though, Dr. O'Neill and General Dunwoody are very involved, as you heard the Secretary mention in his speech on Monday, in finding better ways to do that. More efficient ways that get a better result for less cost. In fact, we're pretty proud of the fact that 8 of the initiatives in the business transformation plan that General Durbin mentioned at the beginning come from the material enterprise. So there's lots of opportunity in a very big business to find ways to work smarter. Mr. Harrington and I are only going to talk about one today in 3 short slides, but we think it has huge potential to deliver savings for the Army in its business, in the business of providing material to the soldier, and particularly in the business of providing services. We think, and I use think very intentionally, that the Army spends somewhere between $50 and $70 billion a year to acquire services. We have to say think because we're not really sure. We can't see it, we don't have very good control over it, and we don't manage it very well. So what we're going to propose here is a better way to skin that cat. Mr. Harrington?
Thanks, Terry. Let me give you a little context, and I'll try to use Mr. Schneider's balloon as an example.
Oh, man.
So the 2 lost souls in that balloon are floating along, and the lawyer's yelling up at him. But somebody's going to say, who the heck contracted for that darn thing? Well, you're looking at the guy that ends up answering some of those questions. But let me see if I can draw for you a contrast. Someone buys the balloon, that's the product. Somebody else lines up a whole host of services to support that product or to support the soldiers that benefit from that product. And as Ms. Gerton said, we know we got a pretty good bracket on the amount of money being spent across DOD and particularly within the Army. We think it's probably 54 cents of every dollar spent is on services of some sort. Logistics services, maintenance, intelligence services, the broad range of base operation support services here in CONUS. So what we've done is collaborate back and forth together in Material Enterprise to come up with a DASA, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Services. How did that happen? Well, Dr. Carter, pursuant to the direction from the Secretary of Defense, has initiated, as General Durbin said, this efficiencies initiative. Out of that has come what's called the better buying power focus, and out of that has come the requirement to establish a senior manager for services management across the U.S. Army. The Air Force has been doing this for well over 9 years. They actually started it about 9 years ago and started implementing it about 8 years ago. And what that is, I'll draw for you a picture, if you will, and you've got it up on the board. Let me walk through an explanation of those numbers on that, and then Ms. Gerton and I will go back and forth and talk about how those things are beginning to play out. We've got a structure in place. We've got the stakeholders identified. We're on our path forward. So, number one, if you take a look down below and left, you take a look at the command acquisition teams. Those are the folks that actually look at developing and executing commodity level sourcing strategies. You've got a service at the command level. How are we going to go contract for that? Well, they're in communication with the command portfolio managers. So you may have an installation management command that's very much expert in the broad range of services that go on at an Army base. You may have, you got Army Materiel Command that oversees maintenance, complex maintenance services across the Army. Well, those command portfolio managers will be responsible for evaluating all those service requirements in those categories, along with the other MACOM areas that will have that type of expertise. And they'll look at such things as strategic sourcing for human services. Mr. Schneider, by the way, and Ms. Gritton will talk about this, I think, we'll show you a slide on that. Mr. Schneider is the senior functional oversight for our HR services spend in the Army now. We actually have a PM for HR services. We spend over $1 billion a year on human resource services across the United States Army for soldiers and their families. So they'll oversee these portfolios. They'll help generate the policy to get a better understanding of how to go more effectively buy those services. And this is all about leveraging those precious O&M dollars we have, because we'll see on the slide there's an awful lot of money being spent in a lot of channels we don't really have visibility over. We know it's being used. We think we're getting something for it, but we think we can get a far more disciplined, discrete management function for it to make sure we're spending the dollars wisely. The command services advocates are responsible for managing all of those service requirements developed in support of that MACOM. So they're going to be the eyes and ears, constant communication with the field, with the execution level, as well as with the Department of the Army level, to be able to make sure we understand all the service requirements and how best to, again, to leverage larger contracts with a broad array of service providers. You know, by the way, one of the pillars of Dr. Carter's, Dr. O'Neill's, General Dunwoody's focus is how do you get a better cost picture out of this so that we have 3 lingua services contracts across the Army. We ought to have 1. And perhaps we can leverage a broader array of vendors to get better rates to control costs. The DASA, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Army Level Services Portfolio Managers, are responsible for being the focal point for managing, sharing, and integrating their strategic sourcing activities across the Army for these various portfolios. We are going in accordance with a taxonomy, if you will, a structure of services based upon a bunch of product service codes, if you will, knowledge-based services, medical services, training services, intelligence services. So the grouping's mature, and we think we've got the group together of stakeholders to be able to start managing that properly. The DASA for services is the delegated decision authority, responsible for governance of all the services spent across the Army. So will there be policies that control thresholds? Will a major command be able to execute its own contracts for a specific service? Yes. We'll just have controls in place to make sure, in case they want to go spend that kind of money, that we don't have another contract elsewhere through which they may exercise that money and get a much better buy for that. So the Material Enterprise Collaboration Council, Dr. O'Neill, General Dunwoody, in consultation with the other core enterprises, will oversee this as it plays out. The Air Force has been at it for 8 years. We consult with the Air Force. We've met with them a couple of times. There are some unique aspects to the Army that we need to make sure we account for when we go lay this out. So contractors out there, if you're a service provider, get ready.
All right, so next slide, please. As Mr. Harrington mentioned, human resources support is a huge section of this, over $1 billion in HR solutions. What's interesting to me about this slide is that only 24% of all the work that we contract for is actually done under the Army's enterprise vehicle for human resources support. So that means the rest, 76%, is done outside of that vehicle. Everybody on their own installation going off to contract for whatever services they need for whoever happens to be local in many cases. Over 785 different vendors and over 197 separate contract vehicles. So just imagine for a minute if you had 5 contract vehicles, how much you would save in overhead, in management, in oversight, in funds control. I mean, it's huge. We think there's probably 4 to 8% of the total value of the spend that can be returned to the Army as a savings by getting a handle on governing just this one service area. So just think about that with all of the other service areas that were on Mr. Harrington's chart. Next slide. But the governance process is not just about that kind of service support contract. It's also about hardware. And within Army Material Command, we're very sensitive to this. So here's just one case in point. The Black Hawk supply chain, spending over $500 million a year. Right? Lots of contracts, again, lots of vendors. If you just look at that opportunity number 1 slice, the dark blue slice up there, we'd spend $28 million for 61 national stock numbers on 48 different contracts. Well, that tells you that we're not very efficient at that management. Again, we think even if you could get 1 to 3% of the savings in terms of streamlining that supply chain and then extend that across every major supply chain that we've got, 3% of $500 million is $15 million, just like that. So if we get our hands around this contract governance, again, we think that the savings could be huge. Now, I will tell you, it's a quick start, but it's not a quick win. Obviously, to put this process in place, to get a handle on all the things we admitted from the beginning that we can't see yet, we think it's probably 3 to 5 years before you really begin to see the results of implementing this kind of governance process. But we also think it's something we absolutely must do. We have the commitment of the Undersecretary of the Army here. It's in the CMO's Business Transformation Plan. It is one of his quick starts. And you have the commitment of the enterprise leaders across the board to move forward on this. So it's something we're very excited about. A lot of hard work ahead. If you want to be the DASA for services, call Ed.
Recruiting all the time.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. And as the Readiness Corps Enterprise representing Forces Command, it's a great position for us to be in because we get to work with every one of our partners to bring the full product together of delivering trained and ready forces for the combatant commander. And I go back to just the title when we started this about readiness at best value. And if you think of it this way, to add one word to that title, I'll come back to this at the end, but we believe with the Army Force Generation process, we're going to provide predictable readiness at best value. And I think that's where one of our challenges has been as a force. We've been doing R4Gen for over 8 years now, yet we're just beginning to really understand what it means. And I think if you go around the room in most audiences and you mention Army Force Generation, you still get a lot of people who say, what is it? What does it mean? What are the rules? What's the business rules? How do you govern it? And so as I learn more about it in this position, as working with the Readiness Corps Enterprise and the other enterprise members, it's always interesting to say, well, what are we really trying to do with this process? It's not just about efficiencies. It's about effectiveness. It's about developing that product. So we're trying to tie that together from the readiness element. And one of our challenges we have is providing a predictable demand signal. Any business model you look at, you go with some type of demand analysis. Well, our demand, as you know, is driven by the combatant commanders in many cases, and sometimes it's not quite predictable. However, we believe through this Army Force Generation process, this is what we can do to help for us as the Readiness Corps Enterprise provide the other members of the enterprise some predictability in what that demand is going to be. And that really leads us to the supply-based model that you've heard the Chief of Staff of the Army and the Secretary talk about before. We're going to say at any given time there'll be X number of forces that are available to use across to the other combatant commanders. Now, what that allows us to do, if you walk that backwards, if you think about a conveyor belt, or if you think about an escalator, or anything that moves in a circle, there's always a forces every single day of the year moving through this process. They're either in their reset phase after a redeployment, or they're training, they're ready, or then they're available. And our goal is to tell units as they return from deployment what they're going to be doing 2 years from today. Now, what that enables us to do with our partners up here is then we can take this supply-based model in order to have this demand signal in a predictable manner. We tell them what we're going to need 2 years from now. And that enables us to then come back and say, now we can start getting smart and get efficient on how we provide predictable readiness at the highest level and most effective readiness over time. So I think that's not commonly understood as we go around. Really the big shift here from our perspective is when you say you're going to have a certain amount of forces available at any one time, that's what we're going to have ready. Then if you want more forces than that, you have to go further and further back into the system and pull forces forward. And I think that's a significant leap
from the way we've done business pre-9/11 and also the way we're doing business today, because today it's the next deployer is go, 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 go. And we'll certainly do that for the nation, but this really changes our business model, I think, as an organization. And then so as the other members have already talked about, then what we need to do is we need to have predictable systems to support this model. And that's where we start running into challenges. I'll give you an example. If we know a unit at Fort Drum needs a truck, we might take that truck from Fort Hood and move it across the United States today, because we really can't see ourselves far enough in advance to predict that we need that truck 12 months from now from Fort Hood to Fort Drum. Not very efficient in transportation costs. Maybe we could have gone to the our material partner and said, maybe you can get one off the production line for them. We don't have to move that truck from Fort Hood, because I guarantee we probably need that truck at Fort Hood too. But right now we don't see ourselves clear enough to be able to make those kind of decisions. So we've implemented some tools to help us do that over time here. And one of them, and I'm going to mention just a couple, not to go into tutorial about different processes, but one of them is the Army's, is the R4Gen synchronization tool that we've started at Forces Command. We're sharing it with the department. And what this does, it allows anybody in our system to get in and start looking out to the future to see down to the smallest level of detail of who is going to deploy or be available next. So they don't have to call us and ask us. They can get in a database system, an authoritative database that says, this is, as we know it today, this unit is going to do this over the next 24 months. And then it allows mid-level managers and junior managers to go in there and start making decisions off of other authoritative documents and sources. It also allows our installation partners to set resources at the installation for either returning units or deploying units. And this also includes our partners with the Reserve component, the National Guard and the Reserve as well, because as you know, we mobilize those forces and we have the same responsibilities to train them, man them, and so forth. So it allows everybody throughout the enterprise, not just the active component, but also the reserve component to get there. But additionally, what we talked about, the Army, General Durbin mentioned about the R4Gen policy synchronization drill, the 22 policies that we looked at. That was the first time that I'm aware of that we brought a large number of Army policies together and scrubbed them through the R4Gen process. Now, I won't tell you how many hours we spent on that drill, but I can tell you at the end of the day, we had total agreement amongst the enterprise on all but 2 policies across the Army. And that culminated with a briefing to the chief, and we'll continue to move on with the secretary, as General Durbin mentioned. But what was unique for that was the level of understanding about how we can work as an enterprise, I think. And we also found through that process that we found other things, another long list of policies now we have to go look at next. So I think it was a huge step for us to do that. 2 other things I'd like to mention, actually 3 other things, is we've also added some conferences about every 90 days to educate and share the knowledge. We have a training support readiness conference and then a reset readiness support conference. And these conferences bring in everybody in the enterprise together, and these are at the GS-15 colonel level. It also includes field units where they come in and we synchronize what their requirements are. And that enables us immediate feedback every 90 days in the system. We hope in the future you can maybe do that with fewer meetings, because you'll have an authoritative database to use, which we still don't have today. But as we develop the architect out, we should be able to then do that. So that's a goal for us as well. And we culminate those events into the Army Synchronization Board, which leads up to the senior leaders, the 4-star level, our bosses in this process. So bigger issues that we have to get at to synchronize the enterprise can be made. And for example, we'll do one this Friday at the 3-star assistant secretary level, and then we move on to do that at the 4-star level and secretary level. So we've added these processes over the last couple of years of understanding R4Gen. Additionally, within United States Army Forces Command specifically, some of the areas that we're looking at to add to this in terms of efficiencies, and also seeing what we can glean out of this force generation process as we improve our products and our daily processes, is we started in our ForceCom campaign plan by actually putting in our campaign plan, improving and creating an environment of a cost culture and continuous process improvement. And since we're mostly operational units, people say, well, how do you apply that down in the motor pool? But we're digging into things like, we've gotten in such a habit because of continuous deployments, and you talk about service contractors, we have huge maintenance service contracts. So now we've already started a pilot for For example, how much can you do in your motor pool now where you can now start weaning ourselves off these maintenance contracts? You know, and General Thurman will put it back as getting back to basics, which is one of his priorities. If we have soldiers in this uniform, you have to go back in and say, how come you have a certain amount of service support contracts? Now, that's easy to say, but it's going to be hard to do, and it'll take time. But we're on that path as we speak right now. As I said, we started our first pilot to say, no, we're not going to pay that. We're going to let the soldiers do that, because now we're probably going to have some more time. And if you go back to where we started, if you have predictable readiness over time, we can start telling units 2 years in advance. You can say, all right, since you have 2 years now at home station, here's what you can accomplish, and where all does that take you down this contract and efficiency path. So I think we're at a real nexus here as we learn more about R4Gen as we enter our 9th year. But I'd go back to restate one thing. This is really unique when you start thinking about a supply-based model for this Army. We have never been on a supply-based model, and it really shifts the way we look at our Army in terms of building progressive readiness over time. And I like to think of it as General McCurran explained several years ago, it's like a rheostat. You can speed up the conveyor belt, or you can slow down the conveyor belt. When you speed it up, there's a cost to it. When you slow it down, you might gain more efficiencies out of it, still maintaining readiness. But at the end of the day, we'll provide that trained and ready force to the combatant commander. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to our partner, Ms. Hammock. Ma'am?
Thank you.
Well, General Sterling, you're not the only engineer on the panel, I'd like to assure you, but as a hot air balloon pilot, Carl, I wanted to assure you I was very glad that it was a lawyer, not an engineer. This morning, General Corelli commented that without energy, the Army stands still and silent. So ensuring that we have available resources to the Army to perform its mission is critical. But those resources need to be managed in a way to assure that we have the appropriate security and that we've reduced our risk. And that is the mission of my department. We have an energy program that is a prime example of a full integration of the corporate strategy that General Durbin was talking about, the process, the implementation, and the management. And it took a collaborative energy enterprise approach, which was line of effort 2 on the previous slide. We've developed a strategy supporting goals, objectives, and metrics. And energy security is one of the key efficiency initiatives that you'll read in some of the reports that were referenced earlier. So we focused on clear business strategies to provide a clear vision. And you can say energy efficiency is a great vision, but without the metrics behind it, it's not implementable. So we've engaged latest energy technologies and planned initiatives to support the mandated energy requirements and then go beyond them into what technology enables us to do. Curbing energy and fuel use and increasing the adaptation of renewable energy sources while protecting the environment. And this is detailed in the Army Energy and Security Implementation Strategy, and since we like acronyms, this is ACES, for those who wonder. And it was developed through a collaborative approach involving FORSCOM and TRADOC and AMC and all the various enterprises, and it's a living document that communicates an Army-wide energy security vision, missions, and goals. What we've identified are various energy strategy champions to provide leadership through the energy enterprise approach. And overseeing that strategy and process is the Army Senior Energy Council, which I chair along with the Vice Chief of Staff. As I said, some of the members are Material Command, FORSCOM, TRADOC, all of the Assistant Secretaries, Reserve Guard, G4, G3, 5, 7. Everyone is involved in putting together this plan. And it's detailed in over 57 specific metrics in order to help us achieve our goal. And some of you were in a meeting earlier where I detailed our goal is net zero energy, in that we are producing as much energy as we're using. And that certainly applies to our installations and even our forward operating bases. When you get to some of our transportation, it's much more difficult. But if we look at things with an idea or a goal or an objective of net zero, it's a different lens by the way we view what we're doing and the specifications that we're writing. What we're using is a tool that came out of the Office of Business Transformation, and it's called the Strategic Management System, or the SMS tool. And using that tool, we're tracking the various metrics. We're tracking the progress, and it makes it very easy to see them using a red as you're not achieving the objectives, yellow, you're on your way, or green in that the objective has been achieved. So following these priorities, following these metrics, enables us to track our progress toward our goal. So the SMS is a tool. It also helps us focus in an environment of limited resources. And you've all heard about the efficiency drills that were mentioned earlier, that we need to achieve various efficiencies. We need to be more cost effective. So in tracking these metrics, it also gives us a tool to identify what the costs are with achieving the objectives, or what the savings are associated with achieving the various objectives. One of the areas in which we're using these tools is, an example is Fort Irwin. In Fort Irwin, we have put together a very collaborative approach to developing what is going to be one of the largest solar energy projects in North America and in the Department of Defense. And it's a 500 megawatt solar field. And this collaborative approach has involved not only the Army, but the Navy and the Bureau of Land Management. It's also involved INCOM and AXIM, the installation management community. The Army Corps of Engineers is involved. We've had to involve the California Energy Commission, counties, state of California, the various utilities, and then we have partnerships in industry as well. And by bringing together all of the interested parties, by bringing everyone together to discuss what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and trying to overcome the objectives, or trying to achieve our objectives, we are making progress. And again, back to the Office of Business Transformation, the idea is to take a look at this from a business prospect. I think the old model of the Army is to do it all ourselves and not to involve the community as much as we are nowadays. And this collaborative approach between inside the Army and outside in the various communities is helping us dramatically. We've talked about a clear and defined strategy with concise, achievable, but some challenging goals. The goal of net zero. And we talk a lot about net zero energy, but our other goals are net zero waste and net zero water. We need to look at all of the resources that are required to operationalize our Army and determine how we can better manage those resources. It's taken strong leadership and targeted champions, people with specific, identifiable, achievable tasks and metrics that they're required to report on, holding people responsible for achieving certain goals. And that monitoring of the progress and evaluation of achievements. This is something that you would expect that we have done, but we have been very slow to react. The Army is notorious for having very long processes and very paperwork-intensive processes. And the intent is by targeting individuals and holding them responsible for achieving very specific metrics, we're able to speed up our progress. And again, the partnerships both internal and external, are very critical to our success and our ability to achieve the energy objectives. One of the partnerships is the partnership between the Secretariat and AXIM and INCOM. And at this point, I'll turn it over to John.
As the Secretary was speaking, I was thinking, I wonder how we could apply the principle of net zero to our population of lawyers. It gives me a few ideas.
Fill the load.
All right, this is Bachelor Lawyer time. Not to detract in any way from the theme or initiative that the Secretary just spoke about on energy security and sustainability. I'd actually like to talk about a different kind of security and sustainability, that which involves the families of our soldiers, and in so doing, illustrate how we're using the principles described by General Durbin in his opening remarks to approach